Welcome. Happy Monday, everybody out there. Welcome to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trae Holiday, and welcome to July 20th. I can't believe we're moving through July so quickly. And you guys know we got a great show lined up for you today. You guys know I got to throw it over to my guy, Big O here. Good morning, Big O, man. And happy Monday, brother.
What's happening?
How are you?
Yeah, man. Happy Monday to you, too. You know what I'm saying? I had a great weekend. I guess, considering is kind of weird compared to a lot of weekends that we've had here. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It was pretty dope, Got out on Lake Washington,
Ooh.
You know what I'm saying? Was able to take another shower, like my second one in like 60 days following all this protest stuff. But man, it was good. But it's good to see you. Look at you always radiating out here.
Hey, man, we got to bring that energy.
You know, in the hood, they be hey, look at Trae just glowing on the screen like that.
That's good stuff. As they told us back in the day, when you go out, you representing your family.
That was it. And, and my mommy always said, make sure you got some clean drawers on.
Ain't nobody gonna be talking about your dirty drawers out there in the streets.
Speaking of dirty drawers in the streets, my friend this weekend was very interesting. But I actually would put let me just tell the viewers what's going on. So we got our first segment here with headlines, and then right after that, really a much anticipated show here this morning. We have Katrina Johnson, who is the cousin and family spokesperson for Charleena Lyles, and really good to have her in here today because there's so many people who've been protesters. And we followed the protest now for almost 2 months, and they say her name, Charleena Lyles, but a lot of people, they know maybe just the basics, and they know that that's a name that they want to represent, but don't really know a lot about Charleena outside of, her life and legacy outside of just, news clips. Yeah. And so, of course, one thing great about our Converge platform is that we're going to allow Katrina to talk in long format, about Charleena, about everything surrounding this case, and she's also joined by Nikkita Oliver.
Nice.
So they're in here.
The thing is that last week it was such, kind of an uproar really with our comments, our audience, so I'm so glad that right away we can bring her family in here to really speak to Charleena, who she was, and the story behind it. And again, I think a lot of folks out there have been taking the sound bites about Charleena, so it's going to be great to get this long story format.
And this the thing is this is why we're here.
Yeah.
And every media serves a purpose, but why we're here is really, around discussion and around conversation. And also, we're going to keep everybody to their word. The union said they're ready, this isn't the time or place, but, people have a lot of questions. People want answers, you know what I'm saying? And also Chief Best SPD is like, man, you know what? She's saying that she's open for these tough questions from the community, and every conversation has to start somewhere.
It really does.
So listen, I want to run through some of these clips because, the big news today was, of course, what happened yesterday right here, right next door to us at the East Precinct, where the windows were busted out over there. And then also downtown at the West Precinct, the SPD is saying that 12 officers were injured and they arrested 2 people. It was a big day. But people keep using the word protesters. Mm-hmm. And, protesters is, I just want to be able to show people here, and, not for protests, against protests, but just that there's different people protesting different ways. And so it's almost like people have to, we have the subclassification. Yeah. I identify as this type of protester. Yeah. But, the reason why that's important is because the protest, the one that turned violent or destructive is probably the only one people really saw on the news. Mm-hmm. And so if you only looked at the news, you might think that all protests that are happening in Seattle were the protests last night. So I want to run through these. The first one you're probably real aware of, and this is the pay to fee. And I tweeted, Seattle gets such a hard time for the way they protest, because I tweeted, I said, hey, it looks like a dance party protest protest on Jackson. And, some people get it. People who follow me, they know my sense of humor or whatever. And then people who don't say, man, that ain't no way to protest. I've lost respect for you guys. That's a whack people. And what people didn't understand, at least my understanding is Africatown's approach and King County Equity Now's approach was a musical event to raise awareness.
Yeah, it
so
definitely was.
it was an awareness event, right?
It definitely was. And also, we know that our artists in our city are hurting right now. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, we want to give artists a platform. The Artist Fund did something yesterday as well, just bigging it up for artists. And I want to give a shout out to Kyle. Kyle was out there making buttons. He made this one for Charleena Lyles' family today. He wanted to make sure that Charleena Lyles' family got it. But I think that what we saw there is a showcasing of a lot of people who come out to just celebrate what the Emerald City really has to offer.
Well, okay, so now here's protest or rally number one. Here's the clip of Pay the Fee, and right here looks like we got some Cupid Shuffle, some Julie C, and Paris Alexa. This is from the Central District.
By yourself, the party's off your face. Keep it jumping. Oh yeah. Motivate, elevate, find a place. Focus the enemy from meditate. Set up my time, I'm like going to eight. Tapping the on the what's the case. Snap on my queen, my dome, my face. I don't navigate. Actually, plan. All the flowers. So high. Never wanna come down.
All right, so that was Pay the Fee, and that was on Saturday on 23rd and Jackson in the Central District. I'll be honest, every time people rally in the hood or in the South End, there's no police, there's no nothing, there's no violence, there's a lot of love, a lot of commerce exchanging between small black business owners and people who come there or whatever. And I think that should really be noted.
Yeah.
That now for almost 2 months, the black community in the Central District and the South End of Seattle has had massive, the one on Saturday was fair sized, but there's been massive protests and turnouts and rallies and protests in the black community. Never been police around. There's never any reports of violence or this or that or anything else. You know what I'm saying? And they continue to protest in there, and march and vigil in the Central District.
Right.
Speaking of vigils, also, so now yesterday, another kind of protest, the Vigil for Racial Justice. And you can go ahead and put that up. It's just a short clip right here. Photos. Thank you, Stephen Brashear. This was at Immaculate Conception. You know what I'm saying? And this was a lot of clergy who came together, state representatives from community who came together to actually pray. And that was their way of protest. And bringing awareness around what's going on. Mm-hmm. So there's protest number 2. Number 3, this was thanks to Joey Weiser. Joey's still out there on the street. This was the District 4 for Black Lives March. You can go ahead and play that.
We are on University. We're on the Ave. If you're from Seattle, we refer to it as the Ave, but we are on University Avenue.
All right, and for people, for people who are just joining us and didn't see the beginning, like I said, when we hear protest or protesters, and there's always the things that catch the headlines and everything else, it'd be very easy for somebody waking up in Seattle today and seeing the news. And actually, we got one more clip from the East Precinct that we'll play here in a minute. But it's easy for someone to think like, this is what happened yesterday at the East Precinct is the extent of what people are doing to raise awareness around their issues of social justice and everything else that's there. And one thing people I think like about Converge is like, man, I just call it like I see it. And really, I thought about it yesterday because, after coverage here at the East Precinct and talking to a lot of people, they were like, man, that's all people doing in Seattle is breaking stuff. And I was like, well, I think that might be the conception, because people aren't seeing these other protests in the news. And I'm just glad that we're able to either cover it. We got partners like Stephen Brashear looking out for us. We can call up people like Joey Weiser, and we can aggregate all that into one place. Now, speaking of the East Precinct, this is Sergeant Truscott, who's the PIO over there. It's a short clip of her explaining what happened here at the East Precinct yesterday.
When they got to the East Precinct, they broke out several windows of the precinct, as you can see behind you, and I think you all got footage of it. They then threw some type of pyrotechnic item into the lobby, which ignited a small fire that one of our community members put out, as I understand it. There were no injuries resulting from that fire. The group then went from the precinct over to Cal Anderson Park, where they gathered for a while and then dispersed.
All right. So, like I said, whether someone is for these protests or against these protests, the truth is just the truth. And, this weekend, and these are just the protests and the rallies that we covered, or were able to get footage from. There's lots of people who did things on their neighborhood level and everything else. Also undeniable as well, the damage that happened there at the East Precinct and some of the other places in Seattle. But, I don't know yet how to, broad protester is of course it's a broad form. I was actually down there. What was that Saturday morning? The Libertarians were there at Westlake Park. You know what I'm saying? It's like they were down there. I mean, it's funny because their message actually echoes some of everybody's. So I mean, there's always the protests that are happening here. When we talk about the protest, you know what I'm saying? The protest to bring value around Black lives. There's. It's
a wide variety.
Right.
It's a wide variety. And just this weekend, I learned about today, there's going to be some workers, getting together in a labor union. They're going to be down there at Dow Constantine's office, bringing messages directly to King County, to Dow Constantine. So they're
going to his house, are they?
No. They're going to be at the office downtown Seattle.
Okay, Dow. Looks like they just coming to the office. So good,
just to the office. They're not going to the house. But again, there's a lot of people that are gathering, like you said, that are really gathering to make their voices heard. And that's very evident here when we see this variety of protests happening.
Right. And so, like I said, over the weekend, pay the fee there in the Central District, the Vigil for Racial Justice up at Immaculate Conception, the District 4 for Black Lives March, and then, of course, that there was this ICE march downtown and everything else. But we see varying different types of protests here in Seattle. Real quick here and moving along. So, what's crazy is that there's the Black Lives Matter mural there in New York City. And so I was on Jackson actually with Def Chef, and Def Chef scrolling, and it had a picture there of the woman who put paint or defaced the mural. And we looked, and it was like, hold on, we know her. I interviewed her in the Chop a month ago. She was there with the Proud Boys and with Tiny.
Wow.
And she said, it was very interesting. We'll let her explain. She said that she came to preach the gospel of Jesus and that she needed security. And so she put on the internet she needed security. So the Proud Boys offered security for her to be able to come into the Chop. But first, this is just a short clip of what we're talking about right here. You can play that, Oya? New York. This is, sorry. You guys got it. You know it better than me. So this is just some screenshots of the paper. That's her as Betty right there, and apparently she moves all around the country. It's a group of them that move around the country, and so there she is right there, put in the paint. And then the officers are arresting her off the paint. One officer slipped on the paint and got hurt, and everything else. But we're gonna jump right into this is back on June 15th, and this was in the Chop. And of course, I talked to everybody. People are like, why you talk to everybody? You see what I'm saying? I talked to everybody. So I'm asking her, I'm like, well, why are you here? Well, what's going on? What are you doing? What are you up to? And this is Betty back on June 15th in the Chop. Right. So, but why is it that you came here today? Is it just to spread the word of Jesus, or is there any kind of other reason why you're here with the Proud Boys and some other people?
My intention is Jesus Christ only. Now, the Proud Boys volunteered. I made an announcement that I was coming out here to preach the gospel. I'm a known street preacher, and so that's why I came. But yeah, you got the Proud Boys that wanted to come out here and just hold it down and be protection just in case things got crazy. And then you got also the guys with the American flags that wanted to join. So I didn't tell anybody no they could have come. That's not really what I'm about. But I know what my intention and my crew of people that engaged intention was, and that's to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right. And what is your view of the Proud Boys?
I don't even.
I mean, as a black woman.
Why the fuck you rolling with them then? Nazi tattoos and the whole nine. So you're rolling with Nazis?
I'm wrong.
Get the.
Listen,
It's not up to me, but I cannot.
Did you pay my bills?
No,
Did you
do
pay
your
this phone
thing.
bill?
Do your
Did
thing,
you pay for my flight?
I'm just trying to inform you.
Okay, so then I ain't trying to hear none of that. When you pay my bills, that's when you talk.
All right, so she said, right, you pay my bills. You pay, I'm grown.
Hey, she said she's grown. She's basically letting us know she can make her own decisions. Very true. You know, as a grown woman, you know, like you said, going across the country though, maybe there's more than just the message. You know,
Well, the
she has her
reason
message.
also why I wanted to put this in here, and the reason also though I wanted to show this different categories of protests and everything else is people need to remember. And we know this, and people who are in the chop every day know this. The outside influence of what's happening here in Seattle is crazy. Like we saw it, we could see the traffic on Twitter and where it's coming from is foreign countries. We know that a lot of people that come into the city, whether they're on the left or the right of these issues, aren't even from the state of Washington. You know what I'm saying? And so what we see manifesting on all sides around here, a lot of it is nothing to do with these 88 square miles here we call the city of Seattle and the Emerald City. A lot of it is nationally driven from other markets and everything else. And we've seen that on all different sides, you know what I'm saying, of this issue. You know, whether it's people coming for what we say, bad actors, was that our word, Bobby? Whether it's bad actors who come in from out of state to tear things up, whether we've had people come in from the far right. A lot of the far right rallies here, you ask them, it's like, man, well, where do you live? You know what I'm saying? A lot of it's definitely not King County, and a lot of them, you know what I'm saying, way out. I mean, and then you have other people, you know, different agendas. Might be a religious agenda, might be an atheist agenda, might be a, you know, political party agenda. Again, you know what I'm saying? They're not from here. People need to just beware of that. And like I said, we saw that in the level of diligence. It's kind of gone down somewhat since the chop was dismantled, but the level of diligence that was required, because you know that there's outside entities at work and at play, you know, it was always something to be watchful of.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw that through the footage, you know, just you talking to people, the live streaming. We saw the competing messages right there in the chop, just folks coming down because, wait a minute, there's an audience here. Wait a minute, cameras are here. Wait a minute, you know, the spotlight of the nation is here. And so we saw a lot of competing messages. And as you said, even me being down here, I met a lot of folks who were coming with their cameras from all over the place. You know, they were trying to capture the footage and utilize it for their own purposes. So I think that you're absolutely right. There was a lot of competing messages, and we also see that with protesting, right? So you're right in that regard.
That's it. All right. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll have Katrina and we'll have Nikkita, and we're talking Charleena Lyles. You're watching the Morning Update Show.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trae Holiday, and right here, I'm so honored to have Katrina and Nikkita on. Katrina, I'm so happy that you're here. I know that you represent Charleena Lyles. You're the spokesperson for the family, and we thank you for bringing your voice to our platform today.
No problem. I'm glad to be here. I felt like I didn't really have much of a choice but to come.
You had to do your own announcement, huh?
I have to set the record straight.
There we go. And also my girl, Nikkita Oliver, man, you know, we run these streets together. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me this morning.
Absolutely. So, you know what? We actually are going to start with a clip, courtesy of King 5, that kind of tells a little bit of the backstory. This aired last month. Alia, go ahead. Let's run that clip.
Police shot and killed Charleena Lyles while responding to a burglary call at her Seattle apartment. Her family and friends gathered this evening and say their cries for change are finally being heard by the nation. King 5's Ted Land is live at Magnuson Park with the message from her friends and family. Ted?
Well, Jessica, Charleena Lyles died in her apartment right up there overlooking Magnuson Park 3 years ago. Her family thought her death might lead to sweeping changes in policing, but it took many more deaths for the country to pay attention. Katrina Johnson lost her cousin Charleena Lyles 3 years ago. Seattle police responded to a burglary call at Lyles' apartment near Magnuson Park and say she advanced on them with a knife when they opened fire, killing Lyles, who was pregnant. Her family says the agony never goes away.
And every time you see another killing, it just happens to you all over again.
This has to stop.
But now, after a surge of anger ignited by the death of George Floyd, they say the country, too, is in anguish. What feels different than after Ferguson, after Charlena's death, after countless others' deaths that's happened over the past years?
I think it wasn't enough for families to just keep saying something. Everybody had to get to the place to where they were finally tired and enough was enough, and we finally got there.
Lyles' families demanding the city of Seattle cut funding to the police department and reinvest in the community. They're also calling on Mayor Jenny Durkan to resign. They say she told them she would change SPD, but they say they're still waiting.
Originally, I was for Jenny Durkan, but when you lie to me and you lie to my family, and we're out here still unable to grieve and still fighting, I can't do that.
In a statement, the mayor's office said, quote, "The city has so much healing and work to do. That is where Mayor Durkan will continue to spend her focus in the coming days, weeks, and months ahead." Durkan's spokesperson says the mayor's committed to a thorough review of SPD's budget, and she plans to invest $100 million in black communities.
Say her name! So what's her name?
This community is still mourning, their cries echoing louder than ever.
So what's her name?
Tonight's gathering was organized as a vigil, but as you can see, it's much more of a celebration of Lyles' life and turned into a rally for change, bringing up cases from all across the country, not just Lyles, but many other people who died during encounters with police. At Magnuson Park, Ted Land, King 5 News.
Well, as we can see there, you know, King 5 did a pretty great recap, and I want to hear from you because when you see that, do you feel that that's representative of the story of Charleena?
I do feel like that is representative of Charlena's story and our continued fight for justice for her.
Yeah. So I really, you know, I know a lot of folks out there want to hear the background from your perspective. Let's get some brief history about who she was and how you know her as her cousin.
So Charleena, first and foremost, she was a mother, you know. She had 4 babies who are still here, and she was pregnant. She was 15 weeks pregnant, you know, so for our family, we feel like we lost 2 people that day, right? And, you know, she loved to smile. Dancing was her favorite thing, which is why we always have a DJ. And she was always willing to help people, even though she didn't even have a lot to begin with. But she would give people her last. And, you know, I mean, that was string bean lean. She was only 100 pounds, literally.
And you guys called her string bean lean?
Yeah. Her brother, mostly Man called her string bean lean.
Oh, I love. See, that's the stuff that nobody knows about. I
Yeah,
love that.
I mean, you know, Lots of people knew her, especially a lot of people, the drivers of public transportation and stuff like that, because she'd always be commuting around with the babies and stuff like that. So, you know.
Yeah. And so for you, you know, this tragic day, you hear this news, and I know that we're definitely going to be getting, because a lot of folks want to hear your response to the spa comment that was made on our show right here on this platform last week. And so you can cue that up pretty quickly. We're going to get to that. But I just wanted to hear from you, you know, as you've been out here, we saw the uptick, you know, George Floyd's death, and now a lot of people have been wanting to say her name. And we want to hear from you. How do you feel that, you know, adding her to this fight, into this movement, you know, does it represent it well, or how can we do it better?
I mean, I don't think that, I think it's represented well. I think that people, you know, choose to fight in their own way. And I don't think that there's a right way to, quote unquote, protest, right? We want to, you know, demonize those folks out there protesting, even the ones who are, you know, tearing up stuff. Sometimes you're just so angry that that's what needs to happen. If that wasn't happening, I don't think that it would shed light on some of the other things that are taking place. So I think that we need to be careful when we want to critique people on how they choose to do their demonstrations. And I feel like all of it is relevant. You know, I've been saying my cousin's name since the day she was killed by the police. I mean, you know, it was completely just, I can't even put it into words how upset I got when I got sent that clip, because I'm thinking to myself, we've only been asking for answers this whole time. Like, you know, we were driving up to, you know, North Seattle thinking that, you know, the police told us they had somebody in custody. It wasn't until family members got there that we realized that the police actually killed her.
Oh my goodness.
You know, and they had already had at least 1 or 2 press conferences, and we didn't even know what was happening.
Wow.
So when we start talking about lies and being transparent and who's doing what, we have been lied to since the beginning of this whole thing. Like, and all we're saying is we just want answers. You know, to come on here parading around with this narrative of my cousin, but at the same time, an inquest will shed light into what happened the day she was killed, and you guys are hindering that. I find that completely absurd and totally disrespectful. Why are you saying my cousin's name repeatedly, and you and your officers are directly the reason why we can't get those answers? Let us get the answers that we are looking for and that we are seeking, and let the public scrutinize what is happening, and it shouldn't be left up to you. If you feel like this was suicide by cop and that's your guys' narrative, then why not let it play out? Why the lawsuits?
Let's see this right now. Let's go to the clip last week. We did have SPOG representatives here, and we want to play the clip from the president. Go ahead so everybody can know what she's talking about right now.
A little bit further on that, and use Charleena Lyles' example. Her death is absolutely tragic. And I think that's probably the example.
You're talking about Charleena Lyles.
To the problem, exactly. Where I hope the community understands that 2 weeks prior, our people successfully were able to de-escalate that situation when she had a lethal weapon and she was holding her family hostage. We took her, remanded her into custody for her mental health evaluation. She was released. And then 2 weeks later, she calls 911 to report a burglary to her apartment. Officers get there. There is some information on the call as far as a flag of mental health, but yet they still have to go investigate that burglary call. They go there, 3 to 4 minutes of a routine conversation, but then they're immediately met with a lethal force encounter where that switch happened. And that is a classic example of suicide by cop. And it puts our people in such a bad position because now, number one, race of the officers gets pulled into this. The victim is black, and you pull in the crisis call, the complete breakdown of mental health system, failing Charleena, failing her family, failing the community. Can't we put the focus before the police respond to why the mental health system broke down for her for the years that she needed help? Why is the system focused on just the police officers who were just there to answer that burglary call, and they're put in such an unfortunate circumstance? Because I can tell you that one of the members that unfortunately had to use lethal force in that situation, they took it so profoundly that it impacted their mental health post-shooting. I mean, all these are critical. We're just human beings.
Right.
And it's just like, that's a tragedy that really needs to be talked about further.
Wow. So there we have it right there. Mike Solon, you know, president of Seattle Police Officers Guild. I know you were already getting into it, you know, your response to, but when you saw that clip again, like you said, you were just enraged because you said you guys weren't even given those answers. And then here you are hearing that play out right here on our show.
We weren't given any answers. We had one conversation, and that was with Chief O'Toole and Carmen Best at our family's church. And they promised us answers. And every time we asked them a question, they said they would get back to us. They would get back to us. And guess what? 3 years later, I'm still waiting for Carmen, because O'Toole is gone, to still get back to me. I brought reference to that when she was running to become the police chief, and I told her, how am I supposed to believe what you're going to do as a police chief when you can't even get back to our family on the simple things that you told us you would a year ago? And so now we're at the 3-year mark, and we still haven't had any answers. No law enforcement came to us and told us what happened, or, you know, or anything else like that. All I know is that she had a mental health flag in the system, and all we see when we listen to the footage and we see the footage is them laughing at my cousin before they went upstairs and killed her. That's what I saw. They didn't take it seriously, and then I'm thinking 2 6'2", 200 and something pound men and 1 5'3", 100-pound woman. Come on now. Let's be for real about it. And then the whole thing with a knife, I don't necessarily believe that, and my family doesn't believe that, but let's say they're saying a paring knife. Do you know what a paring knife looks like? Right. I'm just wondering if everybody knows what a paring knife looks like. And then we're talking about, you know, the height differential, and then we're talking about you guys have bulletproof vests and all those other kind of things on. Seriously? How about we get down to what really happened that day? When you guys approached my cousin's apartment and didn't see her as a human being and thought things were funny, and you guys took her life. 7 bullets, and not only hers, because 1 bullet went through the fetus and killed that baby. So 2 people died that day, and I don't care how they categorize it. What happened that day was wrong, and it didn't need to happen. And yes, there are ways in which we need to fix our you know, mental health you know, stuff in our community. And that's what defunding the police by 50% will help do. So if you want the community to start doing what they need to do, well, then we need some money, because you guys are sucking up the most of the budget. So that we can start implementing those into our community, so we won't have to call you, and we can call on other people that are trained. There are people all across the nation that have been doing social service for years and have been dealing with people with knives and guns and what have you, and they don't have anything, and those people walk out of there alive. Not only do they walk out there alive, but the person who is in a mental health crisis walks out alive. And just because you have a mental health crisis does not mean you should be condemned to your death.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with you there, and I think that that's what a lot of the community is really picking up on. And Nikkita, you know, I know you said you've been with this family since day one, and so really you understand a lot of that. And heading up a lot of these decrim demands, you know, and defund demands, I mean, this is really your wheelhouse here.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, what Mike made an argument for was more considerable investments in the mental health system. The truth of the matter is, had Charlena not been responded to by an armed police officer, but instead someone who could respond to the mental health crisis she was experiencing, Charlena would still be with us. The problem is our society has leaned on the police, on the 911 system as it's related to police, as our response to when people are in crisis. We know that system is failing, and we need to be divesting from the police in order to invest properly in those systems that we know save lives. I mean, and also, you know, Mike spoke to race. Race cannot be taken out of the equation. The truth of the matter is that when Black folks in mental health crisis are come upon by police officers, they are more likely than their white counterparts having a mental health crisis to not leave that encounter alive, to actually be murdered by the police. And so reality is, as Katrina was pointing to, those officers did not see Charlina as a human being. The fact that they knew there was a mental health flag in her file, the fact that they laughed before they entered that building meant that they did not enter with the seriousness or the care that her life demanded. And so it really is important that we attach the policy demands, the way that Charlina's family has, to the situation. I also want to just flag the inquest issue. If Mike truly believes that this was suicide by cop, why are these officers so afraid of an inquest, which is a fact-finding proceeding, which would bring to light for the whole public exactly what happened? I believe it's because they know that in this instance, they did not follow policy or procedure, and they did murder Charlina. I'll say it, they murdered Charleena Lyles. And so it is really important that as organizers, as activists, as people a part of this movement, we bear in mind that defund the police is directly related to investing in community-based public health and public safety strategies, like growing a more robust mental health system that can respond to people in crises and do that in a culturally relevant way. Black people have a very specific kind of trauma that we have suffered living in a white supremacist, racist society, and we deserve to access mental health services that meet us culturally, that meet us where we need it, and that's going to require investments in Black mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is some of the work that's being done right now. We see a lot of community groups are coming together, and they're really understanding like who does what best, so that we can actually create and build. And I know, for you, Katrina, as you move into and understanding a lot of these demands, how have you been responding to a lot of this movement, this swell now? A lot of people out there in the protest world, starting to learn and digging up these facts so they can understand how to represent your family. How are you feeling about this movement now that you're seeing?
I mean, I'm all for the movement. I'm just so glad that everybody has decided to finally join. Some of us that have been on the front line fighting for equity and equality for a really long time, and I think it took the murder of George Floyd to finally get people to wake up and see what is actually happening, right? Because you couldn't go to work like you were used to going and all those other things. You weren't distracted by all these things that happen in your everyday life. You were just like at home, and you were able to see a man's life get taken. And families all across the nation, we've been dealing with this. This has been our struggle. Every time somebody gets killed, it rips open that wound for our family all over again, every single time. So imagine how many people have been killed since Charlina, and how many times we have to try to pick ourselves back up to continue on, not only for her, but to welcome this other family into the family that nobody wants to be in, because the only way to get in to this family is your loved one being killed by the police. I mean, if you just sit and think about that for a minute, how tragic that is. And us knowing you aren't gonna get swift justice, if you get justice at all. You aren't gonna get answers. You're gonna be stonewalled from the very beginning. But on the other flip side of that, you have mainstream media who sensationalizes these cases, and they always take the narrative of law enforcement without even reaching out to families from the very beginning. And for me, I feel like they're just tainting whatever jury or whatever population of people that may be out there. They contribute to the dehumanization of people. And there is only one race, and that is the human race. And it's not going to be until law enforcement starts seeing black and brown people as humans that we are ever going to get anywhere.
You know what? I think that's what so much of this movement is about. I think so much of the way to be innovative now, when we talk about moving into a new normal, so much of it is really addressing that. Nikkita, I know that when we talk about some of the measures that community takes, you know, there are certain things around self-policing. There's a lot of facts, a lot of data coming out that showcases that community does have ways of doing this better. And so I want to hear from you too in regards to some of those measures and metrics. You know, when we talk about moving money into the community, it's really about being able to address a case just like Charleena, going up there with the right cultural approach.
Yeah, and I also just want to bring into the conversation, folks, you know, names like Sean Fuhrer, who was murdered by SPD, you know, in the last few months. I want to remember Tommy Lay and Meechance Gittins Dunlap, and remember Giovanni McDade, you know.
Jesse Saray, Eugene Nelson.
There's so many names.
Michael Ealy, you're right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Malik Williams. There are so many names, and I think it is important for us to ground what is happening with law enforcement, with police in the context that we live in. George Floyd's murder certainly has sparked the nation. But what I want protests here to remember is that this is not something just happening elsewhere, it is happening here. Right. And so when we talk about defund the police, when we talk about investing in community-based public health and public safety structures, we're talking about something that is needed here, very needed. And I want to bring it down practically to where we're at. So, you know, Seattle City Council is going to need to do a budget rebalance for 2020. And what we're asking is them to defund 50% of SPD's remaining budget. Now, what is wild about this as we look through the numbers, SPD has blown through their budget in the last 2 months with the ways in which they have been policing the protests. And so there's actually a very small amount of money left to do that 50% cut, which is why the mayor and the police chief keep saying if we do 50%, there won't be any money for SPD to run. What other department in the city could blow through their budget and expect that there wouldn't be consequences that they did that so early in the year? So that's one point I just want to put out there. SPD is never held accountable, not for their actions or excessive use of force. They're not even held accountable for their fiscal mismanagement. So we really have to be thinking about holistically, what does accountability look? They're talking about a fear of having to lay off officers and saying that that's a labor issue. It's not a labor issue because we see them lay people off in HSD or Department of Neighborhoods or even in other departments, Parks and Rec, all over the city, departments that actually serve our communities. So we know that they have the capacity to make this cut. We know that the layoff should not be an issue. So our first set of demands as it relates to defund in 2020 is that we see $3 million go directly to a participatory budgeting process, because we need to have a way of getting as much community involved in deciding what is the next phase of services that we move into as possible. And we want that process held by community. We want it to be in partnership with King County Equity Now, Decriminalize Seattle, and the organizations that are under those coalitions, because we know that community is going to better administer that process than the bureaucracy will, right? Yeah. The next step is then also scaling up community-based services. So we're looking at $10 million to help those organizations that already exist, that are doing public health and public safety work, be able to scale up so that in mid-2021, those organizations can start taking a much higher level of calls from 911, which is also then about civilianizing 911. As it stands right now, police officers are involved in determining what kind of, when a call comes into dispatch, what gets sent out to respond to that call. And so it is really important that we actually start to get this armed police mentality out of the way that we respond to crises and really get a true social work understanding of what it means when someone in crises calls. You know, we have services in our city that know how to respond to domestic violence, know how to respond to mental health crises, know how to support people through court and other processes within the criminal punishment system, and those systems need to be well funded. The truth of the matter is many of those organizations are doing far more work but are grossly underfunded. We want to get to a place where those organizations have exactly what they need. And then the fourth bucket we're looking at right now is housing, because we know that when people are housing unstable, there's absolutely no way that they can live a totally safe life. When you're worried about where you're going to live or what you're going to eat, you're inevitably going to be pushed into the criminal punishment system. You're going to have to commit quote unquote crimes of poverty, and you're going to have to do things that otherwise you would not do if we made sure that everyone in our city who wanted it had access to safe, affordable housing. So that's 2020. When we get to 2021, we're going to be asking the Seattle City Council to also still commit to that 50% cut of SPD's budget, which is going to be $205 million because their budget right now is $410 million. That is yet again another opportunity to continue to grow our new civilianized 911 infrastructure and to ensure that we grow those services that we know sociologically, we know scientifically. This is not some stuff we made up. There's tons of research that shows this, that we know actually keeps people from ever having to have an encounter with police. And as we strengthen those services, we can continue to decrease SPD's budget until we get to the place where they're no longer needed.
No, wow. I mean, it sounds like, you know, a lot of people out there are like, well, is there really a point plan? You know, does everybody have it together? They know what they're talking about? Because when you hear from the other side, it's like, oh, there's no way that, you know, the police could be defunded in that regard. And so I thank you for laying that out for the people, because I think it's really important that people get educated and get the information that's needed, because this is new. I think a lot of folks are like, well, this is new. This is a new way of thinking. This is a new normal, and this is literally building those foundational blocks so that we can actually have something that, again, based on practices that work. You know, so my last question before we go to break, I want to take it back. You know, as we hear and heard from Spock, you know, this kind of mental health piece. Now I want to hear from you. You just said it earlier that your family experienced trauma throughout this whole process. And I want to hear from both of you. Now, were you ever offered any counseling services, any traumatic restorative practices from the police department? And then, Nikkita, I would like to hear how the community would do it differently.
We haven't been offered anything. We have not spoken to the police, and they haven't reached out to us since the day Chief O'Toole and Carmen Best came to our family's church. We have had nothing since then. We haven't been offered any sort of kind of trauma-informed services, mental health services to deal with what we're dealing with. Nothing at all, no.
Now I know, like you just said, you just laid out a fine point plan. Clearly the community, in terms of looking at it from a human perspective, I believe that the community would do this differently.
I mean, reality is, I want to always ground us in remembering that the police do not stop violence. They respond after an incident has already started occurring or has occurred. So we really have to, as we talk about moving into this new paradigm of community-based public safety, understand that the current system we're in is not working. It is why Charlina was murdered. And so really what this comes down to is understanding that Charlina and her family really deserve to receive robust services up front, but also in that moment of crisis, when Charlina called for help, she should not have been met with laughs. She should have been met with care and compassion. She should have been met with a trained social worker. She should have been met with community-based supports, and rather she was met with armed police. And the truth of the matter is that the police have shown us that they only know one response when especially a Black person in mental health crises scares them, that their only known response is to shoot and kill. Whereas we have seen other times where white folks in mental health crises receive a different standard and level of care because the value for their life, as it's seen by the whole system but by law enforcement, is very different. You even look at an issue, and I know this isn't Seattle, but it does help us understand law enforcement across the board. Dylan Roof murders 9 Black people in a church, and he is somehow apprehended without issue. He is apprehended alive, and he's given a meal. Charleena Lyles should have been met with care. She should have been given compassion. She should have been given a social worker and supports and received a meal.
Wow, what a comparison! Thank you guys both. I know I gotta bring it up. Omari is going to be coming up next, and I know he has some deeper policy questions for you guys and wanting to get into that. I really thank you guys for this discussion, and I really thank you, Katrina, for being here and being able to give our audience some background into who Charleena was. So thank you guys for watching the Morning Update Show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Morning Update Show. My name is Omari Salisbury. We had to tag in for my partner in crime, Trae, on a holiday. A special episode today. So if you guys are watching the clock, we're definitely going long because, you know what I'm saying, we want to be able to give equal time. We went very long with SPOG last week, and it's important. People really like the Converge Network because we let people speak in long format. And it's not a platform that's built for sound bites. So I do have some quick questions here jumping into this initially. Reached out directly to Chief Carmen Best after Officer Solin's statements here last week about suicide by cop. Also reached out to the public information officer over the Seattle Police Department to see if that was their official position. And the SPD, they sent us a long email with a lot of links to a lot of documents. But basically what SPD said is that Solin's comments and statements doesn't or reflect or represent the SPD. Do you have any thoughts on that?
If it doesn't reflect SPD and he represents officers, it sounds to me like y'all need to do some work in that area to make sure that he is not out here just saying things that are going to be harmful for community and for the families. That's what it sounds like to me.
Right, and Nikkita, she just brought up something right here, harmful for community. A lot of times in this age that we live in, I think people underestimate the power of words, because we're so whatever by social media and this and that. But how did those words, as a community member, but also an observer, because I know you got dragged right into it when all this stuff first got on the internet. What is the impact of these kind of words, not even only in this case, especially in this case, but in other cases around policing, and the terminology used, and how does that impact especially the Black community?
Yeah, first off, officers already have a major media platform to tell their story. Katrina pointed to something very important that I think people often miss. When Charlina was first murdered, SPD had already done 2 press conferences before the family had even gotten to get to Sandpoint and have a conversation about what had happened. So SPD and a lot of police departments do this. They run to the media to get their narrative out first. As an attorney, I know that the narrative that gets out first is always going to impact my client, because people are going to believe what they hear first, and everything you do after that is a matter of trying to disprove the story that people have latched onto. And so, SPOG and the Seattle Police Department play this game. I'll call it bad cop, good cop, where Mike gets to go out and say whatever inflammatory thing spins the narrative in favor of law enforcement, and SPD can say, well, that's not reflective of us because he's the president of the police union. And at the same time, getting to go out and spin that narrative in that direction starts to set the stage of what the family now has to chip away at to try to get the true facts out there, notwithstanding the fact that SPOG has been helping officers fight the inquest process. So the legitimated process by which the fact-finding process we have in order for the community to be able to engage the true facts when a police killing happens has been stalled now for 3 years. As a result, the only thing that the broader community, not just Black community, has to go on is what's in the media to understand and know what happened to Charlina. So the harm that does is every time the family is trying to fight for justice, they now have to push back against both the media machine and the stories that have been put out there by folks like Mike.
Right, and an inquest is one of the things I really want to talk about and get deeper into it, because there really hasn't been an official determination. But I want to bring that up 1 second. One thing I will tell you is this: when you talk about getting the story out first, right? And I will say this, that what day was Pink Umbrella? Flashpoint. That was the Sunday. Joe, that was either June 1st, May 31st, or June 1st. So, I mean, that day, Bobby was there and Eric was there, and we had no idea. So what happened, I ended up getting that footage right there on the barricade, the Pink Umbrella. Millions and millions of views around the world, where everything's happening. And, I'm also there. De-escalate. Let's bring it down. As this Black kid from 29th and Jackson who was beat up by the police as a teenager and everything else on the front line, bring it down. Let's de-escalate. Anyways, it popped off. We all saw how it went down from my camera and from the camera up here on the Stout building. Everybody, we clear our eyes, we get downtown, and I see an alert on the Seattle Times, and it says riot on Capitol Hill. We were bugging down there. It was like, well, riot. So we're in Westlake, and we're thinking that they're rioting right now. And I'm like, man, we just got downtown. There must be other people up there rioting, because what we experienced definitely wasn't a riot, especially if you'd been in downtown Seattle that Saturday. Covering that Saturday with 5 police cars on fire and everything else. That was a riot situation. 100%. The whole reason why I bring that up, though, is that on that day, SPD did put out a narrative first. And their narrative said that protesters started a riot. That was the thing, and that's not what happened. There was definitely stuff going over the barricade. You know what I'm saying? For sure, our cameras caught that. Right. But started a riot. But it was that film, that piece of video, and actually the New York Times was able to break it down second by second by second by second about how everything started. I only bring that up to say is that we have seen that here before. Just during protest season, to where that narrative got out first. But if there was no Pink Umbrella video, if there was no Flashpoint video, anything else that had to refute that, you see what I'm saying? And we saw during protest season, a lot of times things had to be walked backwards. Yes. And I only bring that up because to give viewers some context about certain things. A lot of our viewers know that day, they know Pink Umbrella and everything else.
And there's use of trigger words like riot or looting. These sorts of words, when they get into the public sphere, they color the whole movement. And mainstream media knows what words to use to get clicks. And in many ways, the police know what words to use to drive the story in their direction. Suicide by cop was a very intentional use of words that mischaracterized what had happened that day. Charlina called for help because of a burglary. And if all of the information for the inquest were out there, people would get to see the video. They'd get to hear the video where the cops laugh. They would get to see and hear more of the facts as to how the cops, they didn't have their tasers on them that day. They only had their guns. So they didn't even have a less lethal force to respond
the
with.
rule is supposed to be at least one method of less lethal force, which is the taser, mace, or the baton.
Yes.
Right, and one of the officers did not have their tasers on them, and that was a violation of policy, and I think he got 1 week off without pay, and my cousin's dead.
Right. Let's talk about this inquest here, because, and Nikkita, as a lawyer, and as long as you've been on this, I'm sure you guys probably got the same legality understanding, or even higher for you on your end. Now, the inquest is basically a process where, once you explain in a layman's term for our viewers what the inquest is, just the front and back end of it.
Yeah, so an inquest is really just what we would call, quote unquote, a fact-finding proceeding. It is an opportunity to walk through everything that happened that day. They would also pull out evidence around policy and procedure. They would ideally, if inquests are done the way they're supposed to, all officers that have knowledge of what happened in the shooting and the killing could be subpoenaed and called to testify. And then the way that our inquest should happen in our county, the jury really should have the opportunity to make a determination about criminality. Did something criminal happen?
So the inquest is basically just the fact-finding mission. And so who are the investigators who are fact-finding? Is that outside oversight, or is that within SPD itself?
It's jury members, like you and I. You would have
get called in a jury.
You would have an inquest jury that hears all the facts. I believe there is a series of questions they respond to at the end to determine certain aspects. You'll have an attorney, usually from the family and also from the city or county.
So it's almost like a grand jury in a sense, but not
like
going after but where a jury is impaneled and basically people present evidence one way or another.
Yeah, the difference between a grand jury is definitely to determine whether or not there will be an indictment.
Right.
What happens at the end of an inquest is a couple of things. One, there's now a public record, a public fact-finding of what happened in that instance, which in my opinion allows community to have access to details we don't get through media, to then be able to make a determination of our own. Do we think that law enforcement acted wrongly? The second thing that can happen and should happen, there's actually a lawsuit happening about this right now, is the inquest jury gets to make a determination about criminality. Now, the prosecuting attorney's office does not have to follow this, but they can determine whether or not they think what the officer did was criminal.
It's like a recommendation to the prosecutor. So let me ask you this then. If the system that we have in our city is an inquest, and the inquest is supposed to, whether they find for negligence or whether they find that the police did their job, if that is the system that we use, why are you saying that the inquest has been held up for a few years? And does that also mean that there has been no official determination on this case?
So a couple things. So the inquest has been held up because they brought reforms to the inquest that makes it better for families to engage in the process, because it was really just it was really one-sided and always leaned towards law enforcement, which they made reference to it the other day. They want to go back to the good old days.
Which families wouldn't get access to the evidence. They wouldn't have an attorney. It was a very one-sided process. Right. Where law enforcement really had the upper hand in kind of controlling how the proceeding went and how families got to engage in it, even though that's not the way they would describe it.
Right, and even we wouldn't even be able to share anything about our loved one, humanize them. None of that was allowed in the old inquest process. That's why this one is important. But make no mistake about it, because before the investigation was even complete on Charlina, we met with the deputy prosecuting attorney, which was Mark Larson, and he told me and my cousin, Charlina's sister, Monica, that neither of the officers would be charged with the killing. And that was before the investigation was even complete.
So he told you that before the investigation was complete, the inquest. Did he say that, just in the context, did he say that like, well, it's in my experience, police usually don't get charged, or he said that like, these guys aren't gonna get charged?
He said they aren't gonna get charged. And from that day, I was like, oh, okay, I see how this works. there is really no such thing called justice in the sense that I think is going to happen, which was why I was pushing for like 940 and other sorts of kinds of reforms, so that actually an officer to even be held accountable could even be a thing, because it wasn't here in Washington State. And that isn't even enough.
Well, okay, so I just want to be clear, and probably maybe people out there in the audience who aren't familiar with this case, is what I'm hearing you say is there hasn't been a final determination on the murder of Charleena Lyles.
Or many of the other folks who have been murdered since have not had inquests either.
When Solon made his statement, it's not even aligned with, it's not even based upon, well, you know what, I looked at the final inquest, and based upon the final inquest, I feel that it was suicide by cop. What you're saying is there's not even an inquest that's out for anybody to make this a statement, you know what I'm saying, based on the inquest or whatever.
Correct. And he knows that, and he knows that his officers and some of the other cities, as in Federal Way, Auburn, Kent, are holding up the process with their lawsuits so that not only my family doesn't get to know what happened to their loved one, but neither will the Yosia Falatongo family, neither will Jesse Saray, neither will Sean Fuhrer, neither will so many other people that are still waiting. There are at least 30 plus families waiting on an inquest.
So who's in charge of the inquest? Because it sounds like that's who we need to be going to talk to.
Dow Constantine is really supposed to be.
Didn't somebody go into Dow's office today?
There is a protest, a labor protest, going to Dow's office today downtown. Dow Constantine is really supposed to be like the head administrator of ensuring that inquests happen. Now, inquests are then done by an administrative hearing judge, but in terms of who makes sure that they happen, Dow Constantine has that power. And so there's been these suits that are holding it up. I really recommend people go find the community brief that was filed and a community amicus brief that was filed, because it explains why community really wants these inquests to move forward.
Right. Can I get my camera, Alia? Are you able to? Okay, so here we go. So County Executive Dow Constantine. So want to just let you know, we want to be contacting your office. You know, Converge is really good for going to the top. You know, we call Governor Inslee, we call Mayor Durkin will be happy, like, man, he finally going after somebody else. But you know what? No matter where you're at on this issue with police, whether you feel that the police are the best thing ever, where you feel they should be defunded 100%, what is missing here is due process. And if due process is being jammed up in your office, County Executive Dow Constantine, we need some answers. The people of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. County, whether you live in the municipality or whether you live to the north, the south, the east, and west, if you're in this county, even I think they said Vashon Island's even in King County, the most western border. See, I'm always learning something on this show. The people of this county need accountability. And so, like I said, I would encourage people, whether you're, the heavy on the blue line, whether you're heavy on defund, I think that everybody in this county needs to go and call up Dow Constantine and say, hey, let's move this inquest, of the process along. And it takes activism from the people, by the people, to make these wheels turn down there in City Hall, or be it the county council or at the state level. So, County Executive Constantine, we're going to see you an email later on today. We'd love to have you on the show so you can explain what's going on. And maybe, who knows, it might be a citizen type of thing. We need more citizens to do this and that. Put the call out there. But we're going to use the platform to do that. Now, speaking to another chief executive, Mayor Durkin, I saw that in the clip from King 5 there, that and even early on here, you said you were a big supporter of Mayor Durkin, and now you're like, you want Mayor Durkin recalled. We had the recall guys here last week, but once you explain to everybody that is why exactly is it that you're saying that not only are you unhappy with the mayor, you're like, you want the mayor out of office?
So our family's reasoning for asking Mayor Jenny Durkin to resign is simply because she lied to our family. And we will not tolerate that. And that's why she hasn't said anything about it. She knows she lied. What
did she lie about?
She told us when she was running We sat down with her and she told us that she would be accountable as we try to seek justice for Charlina. She said that she would be accountable for the community and make sure that none of the stuff that has happened before her happens on her watch. And that was a lie, because as soon as she got in, not too far after she got in there was the SPOG contract. That was strike one. Then she as in Martin Luther King County, they had a lawsuit that was hindering the inquest process. She later dropped that after I, said how I felt about it. That was strike two. And strike three is people continue to die. And you continue to do the same thing over and over and over again. And for that, I will not have that. You promised that you would do something different, or were you just trying to get the black vote? Were you just trying to get black people on board for your agenda for you to become mayor?
It's called politics. And I mean, unfortunately, in Seattle, especially, and a lot of other places, man, it's the dog. We talked about this the other day. Who we had on was talking about pandering. They were like, somebody gonna come to the black community, you know what I'm saying, pull the shoes, go quick pack, get that chicken, sit down with everybody and say it's community. And
hey,
then
some of us don't have to pander.
That's just true. And then they go and do other things. So here's the thing: is that the mayor, in that clip from King 5, the mayor said that she continues to meet with community. She continues to have these discussions. She, the healing and everything else. I know that Trae talked to you about SPD, but as far as the city, the mayor's office, different offices there. I mean, do you feel that you're being included in the process? And even if it's not you, maybe if you don't represent everybody, but that unfortunate club or family of people, you know what I'm saying, who have lost loved ones, are any of them included in this process? What the mayor is talking about in community building?
I think that there has been only one person that I know of who has lost a loved one that has been invited to the table, and that was Andre Taylor. And Andre Taylor does not speak for all families. He does not represent all families, and he does not represent all of the people in that community. I mean, I live in Tacoma. I go out and do things in Tacoma, as well as here, right? But I am not the expert on everything that happens in King County. But Nikkita Oliver and Decriminalize Seattle and other folks should be at those tables, right? If you're not doing work in your own community, how are you going to be doing work in somebody else's community?
So what I hear you saying is with the Charlina, yourself, it's almost like, you're staying active for the hopes that seat at the table is occupied by people like Decriminalize. So they're having
right, and other families in Seattle. There are other families in Seattle. There are so many other families that in unincorporated King County and specifically in Seattle that can be up at that table, right? I'm more than willing to take a seat, but I don't mind yielding my seat to other people. I don't feel like I have to be there because I'm going to support these families behind the scenes regardless. I don't have to be at every table. It's not about me. This is not a moment. It's a movement, and it takes all different kinds of people and all different kinds of angles. And the mayor should not be dictating who is community. How would she know? Does she live in that community?
Nikkita, I'll let you follow up on that.
I mean, I agree. I think reality is too often when politicians talk about meeting with community, it is those community members they are most comfortable with, or it is those folks that are least likely to give them pushback. And what we really need, especially in a democracy, is to have elected officials that are really actually willing to engage the folks most impacted, who likely are going to actually have a lot of critiques of them. And I have seen Mayor Durkin and Chief Best not only shy away from those who are pushing so hard, but try to go find those black faces that support their direction and never really engage those who don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I talked to a lot of people downtown, especially early on. Not these days. A lot of people have censored me now. They don't. Early on, before I get a lot of interviews, but it's like, man, this is the position that guys take. It's not always going to be. I mean, it's different, but you know what? It's like people talk crazy to pro athletes because they don't want people heckling them. Hey, you get paid all this money, man. You know, like somebody like LeBron gets heckled, even worse online than out on the court. You know what I'm saying? I mean, even Russell Wilson gets, heckled, this and that. It's different. It's a sport, but it's an expectation that not everybody's going to agree with. Even people want you to win. Russell, people love the Seahawks. Why didn't you pass instead of run? They want the Seahawks to win. They disagree with the play call. And Pete Carroll, they disagree. That's the nature of being in that arena. Pete Carroll can't be like, I'm only going to take questions from reporters that I agree with. Russell, that
sounds like somebody we know. Yeah, sound like Trump.
The only person who could get away with all of that was Bart Schott, but that's a whole different kind of story. But it's crazy that these public officials who are elected, now all of a sudden they run away from a dissenting voice. I mean, imagine if Pete Carroll did that, people would be like, we got to fire him.
I mean, even worse, they use the language of the movement and then run away from the movement that has actually developed that language. If you read Mayor Durkin's tweets, you would think that she was down with defund the police. You would, if you looked at what
actually, and I'm sorry, let me stop you right there. And if you don't mind, because we have Nikkita here, there's a few defund questions that I wanted to ask her about. One, the mayor, 56 million. She wanted to move 56 million in operations that are currently sit in SPD operations. She wanted to move out into independent operations. That's different than defund, right?
Correct. Yeah, simply moving operations is not defund, though that does need to happen. There are things like 911 that needs to be moved out of SPD. Defunding the police is actually about taking funds, not just departments within SPD, but actual funds, divesting them and reinvesting them in the strategies that we know actually work.
I haven't heard, I've heard them say that strategy, and so maybe this is what you mean. Because we've heard Mayor Durkin on this show, and when we did the interview at City Hall, but talk about defund, and a lot of times it sounds exactly like how decriminalize or defund is saying, but it's actually two different things. I think what the mayor is saying is like in an operational sense, shifting funds.
Yes.
And what defund is saying is like, yo, give us the bag, and we're gonna go put it in the neighborhood.
Exactly. And that is the difference. We don't simply want to move certain operations around of SPD. We want to significantly decrease the size of SPD and invest in scaling up community-based public health and public safety strategies. And that's not going to happen if it's just operationally moving departments and funds.
And now, what do you think of Chief Best? Chief Best has come with her reimagination. The last time that I really talked to you was we had a text message conversation, because Chief Best had made a statement, and what I latched on was the part about mental health. And Chief Best was like, there's a lot of services that really the police probably don't want to do. They talk about 17,000 mental health calls. And then you got people like Decriminalized who was like, hey, there's community organizations that are best suited with this, but they just need funding. And Chief Best also said, these organizations just need funding. And so what I did see there, at least in our view, was a parallel, right? I'm always trying to find a bridge to build. Yeah. And it looked like to me in that conversation, it looked like mental health might have been a space. But what do you think about the chief's whole reimagination strategy here? And I'll also ask you as well, Katrina.
Again, I think it's a way to try to quiet the movement. Reimagine police is some idea that we can take armed responses and reimagine them and make them better. If there's 17,000 mental health calls and they know that they're ill-equipped to respond to them, then the funding they've been using to respond to them should be removed from them and given to organizations and institutions that are equipped to respond to them and need to be scaled up in order to do it. That's just the reality of it. And we know that SPD is not equipped to respond well to mental health, domestic violence, housing instability issues. And so as a result of that, if we know that this agency that we've invested $410 million in without any proven track record of effectiveness is ineffective, she's admitting it, then the thing is to, if you were just thinking fiscally manage well, move those dollars into an institution that can respond effectively and actually keep the public and community safe.
Right, and before I have you answer, I think that for defund, because defund is a blunt tool, and it's probably supposed to be that way because it's like defund, and then behind that you get all the details of what defund really means.
And we're working on those details.
Right. Well, I was saying what I told you before. I talked to Riel Johnson, and Riel Johnson, I think, probably had the best explanation when I try to explain to people online. Riel said that for him, there's an investment made in public safety. X amount of dollars, $400 million if you just say police. The actual budget is bigger because it includes fire and medics. But what he's saying is, okay, $400 million are invested in public safety. He said the public doesn't feel they're getting a return on their investment, so now they want to reallocate this budget to be able to effectively get a return.
Correct.
And it was like, man, it was like defunded, like one sentence. But okay, so I see you're on the same page. When you hear Chief Betts talk about reimagining policing in Seattle, what are some of your thoughts?
I mean, I think that she is just trying to sugarcoat things. I think that she is trying to skate by and appease some of the Black people in community that still support her. And that's what I see happening right now, because there is a cohort of individuals that still support her simply because she is a Black police chief, right? I'm not supporting anybody because they are white or Black. I am supporting you because your values align with my values. I do not want to see policing done with social workers or riding along with police officers while the police are escalating a situation and the social workers are trying to de-escalate that situation. Now, not only are they trying to de-escalate the officer, they're trying to de-escalate the person who is in a mental health crisis to begin with, right? So I think we need to pull it out. We need the SPD to stop gatekeeping these people that are trying to do these programs. And make no mistake about it, LEAD is not the panacea, right? But it is a tool for individuals that commit law violations or who have profound behavioral health needs, right? And we need to think about them being able to move into there. We need to talk about, DESC and other organizations and Black-led organizations, creative justice, community passageways, credible messengers, moving into their communities, doing the work that they're already doing for their people, and knowing that they're holding their people and they see them as human first. Need to be doing that work.
And let's remember that reimagine is just another way of saying reform. They're literally saying the same thing they've been saying, which is reform SPD. They can't say that anymore because it was clear that the consent decree and all the reformist ideas did not work. So now it's reimagine SPD. It's just a nice way to say reform. And I think the power of this movement right now is people are not willing to accept reform. They want transformation. There is an understanding that policing is deeply racist and rooted in racism and has continued to perpetuate racism. And why do we continue to invest in a public safety model we know does not work for everyone when we have science and sociology that tells us what public safety, what public health strategies would work for everyone? And that's really what defund is about, getting a new paradigm, a system and an infrastructure in place that keeps people from ever having to encounter violence or the criminal punishment system.
Right. Man, we're really, Alia, do you have John Lewis, the clip? I know it's out of order. I want you guys to say we were supposed to do a change, a set, and breaks and everything else, but we're out of time here. We just want to, I want to make sure and get this in because it's a highlight of John Lewis, and I want to be able to play that so our audience can see it. And then I'm gonna come back to you guys for some last words here. Real quick, want to be able to get this in. This is, and I actually got this from the BBC because the BBC really does a good job at taking their time on a lot of stuff. Used to live over there in that part of the world, but especially when they highlight stuff in America, they actually tend to take their time on it. So this was just a clip right here. We wanted to make sure and get this in. We thought we were going to have more discussion about the late congressman today, but I think that this discussion that we've had here together has been amazing. But I definitely want to play this clip, and then I'll come back to you guys before we get out of here. Go ahead, Alia.
Now, US presidents past and present from across the political divide have paid tribute to one of the leading figures in the American civil rights movement, John Lewis. He died at the age of 80. He was one of the organisers of the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King made his I Have a Dream speech. Rajini Vaidyanathan looks back at his life.
John Lewis dedicated his life to fighting racism. He marched alongside Martin Luther King and lived to see a black president. Born in Alabama in 1940, John Lewis grew up in an America that was deeply segregated.
I would come home and ask my mother, ask my father, why segregation? Why racial discrimination? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But Dr. King inspired me to get in the way, to get in trouble.
As a student activist, he became a close ally of Dr. Martin Luther King, fighting racial injustice with a message of non-violence. He took part in sit-ins against white-only lunch counters and was beaten by white mobs as he peacefully protested segregation on buses.
You arrest me, you beat me, you throw me in jail. Well, what else can you do to me?
In 1963, John Lewis was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington, where Dr. King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech.
Looking out over that crowd, I saw hundreds and thousands of young people, fresh from the jails of the South, fresh from the struggle, the front line. There, we were ready. We were prepared to go back to the American South and fight the good fight.
And so they did. 2 years later, marching for voting rights for African Americans. They walked from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama,
You are ordered to disperse.
where they were attacked by police. By the 50th anniversary of that march, John Lewis had become a politician, known as the conscience of the US Congress.
It is a rare honor in this life to follow one of your heroes. And John Lewis is one of my heroes.
And it was Barack Obama who awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor, when he was 70. Diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last year, John Lewis was seen at recent protests after the killing of George Floyd.
We must keep the faith, keep our eyes on the prize.
John Lewis lived through many chapters of the civil rights movement. His mantra was simple: never give up, never give in.
John Lewis, who's died at the age of 80.
Man, rest in peace, John Lewis. Is like, man, what an icon. What I really like, what resonated with me about John Lewis over the years is that, you know, he was a statesman with a mission. You see what I'm saying? There's a place kind of for everybody. There's the people who are loud, there's the people who are quiet, and there's the people who they said that John Lewis could talk to anybody. He was like a dean of the Congress. You know what I'm saying? And people who vehemently disagreed with, he was able to hold a conversation with. I kind of try to pattern myself after the congressman, that even people that I disagree with are able to have a conversation with.
Yeah, I mean, that's really where the bridge building happens, right? It's about understanding somebody who you think is on the opposite side of you. And clearly he represented that and exemplified that in such a beautiful way for our community. We were on the call with Dr. Mims when the news came down on Friday, and all of us just gave a moment of silence because we all know that name and we know his work.
Yeah, I mean, John Lewis, iconic. And, you know, I think what people probably understand is, like, 23 when the March on Washington, 23, just passed away at age 80. So that's 57 years. So I know a lot of times, especially people who are watching these protests online and things like that, whatever change they might be looking for, whatever side of it, it's like, imagine 57 years, this guy is still at work because the work clearly isn't done.
Oh,
Katrina, we want to give you the last word. Tell whatever it is that you want the public to know about Charlina and also about what you're doing, and, you know, maybe how people can get up with you.
Okay, I'll start with, rest in peace, John Lewis and everything like that. And what he demonstrated was it takes people that sometimes have to go within the establishment and fight from the inside out while people are also fighting from the outside in, right? That's the only way we're going to get it done. And I think for me, I think that anybody who's willing to stand up and fight against police brutality, I don't care what color you are, meet me out there on the front lines. And as far as, Charleena Lyles and her life and legacy and saying her name, you can support our family by, getting up with me with families on the front line. Not only do I represent my cousin, I support families all over the nation, which is why I have to fly to New York and support 2 families out there on Thursday. It's a movement, and it is led by families. They are the experts. It is centered around families because they know what they need because they are the ones who experienced it. And if you don't have them at the table, you are doing not only yourself a disservice, but you are doing them a disservice and the loved ones who are no longer here.
All right, there it is. No matter what, wow, rest in peace, Charleena Lyles.
Absolutely.
And want to thank you for joining us today. And, thank you, for being here. And it's important. Like I said, we didn't know what direction. We were really caught off guard when Solon brought up Charlena's name because we didn't bring her up. He brought her up. But I want to thank you for coming here and bringing the other side of the story, give us some balance to the viewers, and also it's a lot of people who might not have known as much about this case and everything else. They've learned a lot from you today.
I appreciate you guys allowing me to be here and on your guys' media platform to set the record straight. I appreciate that. It was very triggering and traumatizing for our family to see those and have them sent to you. So, I would just think that people just need to realize there are families out there that are still hurting, that are too busy fighting and have not had the time to grieve, and we need to be respectful to those families and the person that is no longer here because they died from police violence, whether justified or unjustified.
Right, and I'll say, County Executive Constantine, you know what I'm saying? I mean, people should ultimately be able to speak freely about a case, and the only way that can happen is at the end of the day is for these inquests that are jammed up out there to come, for the process to start moving. So we're going to reach out there to Dow Constantine, to the county executive's office, and like I said, no matter where you're at on this issue, people, the process has to move forward. People need to get involved. Hey, I want to invite you to stand with us, huh?
Yeah, we got to stand when we end.
So what I know we went long today, but it's for a very good reason, everybody. And we're back again tomorrow at 11 a.m. for the morning update show. Any last words, Trae?
Yeah, just thank you again for being here and honestly representing, like you said, those families that are still dealing with the death of their loved one. And so just thank you for uplifting that message and actually being here on this platform. Thank you. I'm glad that you guys stayed with us. Thank you for watching. As O said, we'll be back tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Peace.
Voice and sing, dealer than heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on. world.